Yes, I can.
Awesome. So I just introduced you to the listeners a little bit, but will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Joe Kwaczala. I am a stand up comedian originally from Pittsburgh, but now I live in Los Angeles. I do stand up and I make videos for a little thing called the internet.
Nice. What was your path into comedy like?
I always wanted to do stand up and I guess act and write and stuff. Like I was a huge comedy nerd, I guess you could say. When I was little slash when I was like in high school too, I was like obsessed with Conan O'Brien and Jon Stewart and The Simpsons. And anytime stand up was on TV, I was fascinated by it. And it was kind of it felt like unattainable, so I didn't really tell anybody that I wanted to do it because you see it. It's the same. It was the same to me as like seeing an astronaut on TV, right? You know that people do that, that those are real humans, but like, who gets to actually go to the moon? So like, I kind of had it stowed in the back of my mind. I would write jokes and put it under my mattress, because it was my shame. Um, but when I was in college, and I actually went to college in Indiana, I went to college at Notre Dame.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
You're
and
French Irish.
yeah, I guess the president of Notre Dame has COVID, so
Yeah.
boo, we don't support. Um, there was an opportunity to perform stand up on campus for students, and when I realized like, oh, that like other students are doing stand up, like I can do that. That it felt like much more of an attainable goal. So I started doing stand up there in college. I was very low stakes, very supportive environment because the student body is just they're impressed that any of their fellow students are speaking on stage. So you're given a lot of forgiveness. And I started doing stand up there. I found myself in, and I'm going to give, I don't know how detailed of an answer you were expecting here, but I'll
Go
go
for it. Go
pretty
all
in
in.
depth if you're okay. Um, I found myself going to Chicago in the middle of college for a semester for a program at Second City called Comedy Studies, which was a 4 credit college course of studies that was every day, all day at Second City doing acting, writing, improv, you name it, history of comedy. Like it was really cool. It was college courses, but it was all focused on Second City, taught by people at Second City. And that took me to Chicago, and then I realized I started doing stand up there, and that was like my real entrance into real deal, not on a campus stand up, and that was exciting. And I got to know people in the scene there. So when I eventually had to go back to Notre Dame and graduate, found myself in Chicago, did the was part of the stand-up scene in Chicago for about 4 or 5 years. And while I was there, I found myself very lucky to get a job writing for the Onion News Network while I was in Chicago. That timing worked out really well because the Onion used to be in New York, and then they moved to Chicago, but not everybody moved with them, so they needed to hire people who were local to Chicago, and I happened to be there. And I did a late night talk show. So there were a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different types of comedy in Chicago, and that was great. And I felt like once I was kind of ready to move on and I was serious about this, as a lot of people do in second tier comedy scenes, you either move to New York or LA. I chose to move to LA, and gosh, I was probably in LA for at least 4 years before anything I felt like really happened in my comedy career. But eventually, I did this thing called Up Next, which is like a comics to watch thing for Comedy Central. That's how it kind of got in with the Comedy Central people and the Comedy Central system. And then within a year or two after that, I found myself doing a half hour comedy special. And then that was like my big TV stand up debut on Comedy Central. And then sometime after that, a pandemic hit, and now I just hang out in my room.
Yeah, that little thing, COVID 19.
Yeah, right. So there's my full comedy history, maybe too in depth, but I'm sure also missing some things too.
No, it's all right. It gives plenty of good jumping off points. So obviously you've been writing comedy for
Hmm.
about as long as you can remember. But in school, were
Yeah.
you that stereotypical, funny, loud, class clown kind of a kid?
N- No, I don't know if it would be a stereotype, like, because I'm not like running in, like taking my shirt off and being like, food fight or whatever. But it was more of like the kid in the back of the room, almost too quietly muttering sarcastic things so that like not too many people
Just
can
getting
hear
people
it.
around you to get in on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was more like that. I even then I think kind of, thumbed my nose at the idea of like, the guy, the class clown. Like I was maybe a little too elitist at the time of like I don't bring myself to such lows. My comedy, and this is me, a 16-year-old idiot being like, no, I'm a more sophisticated writer of high comedy, but
Yeah.
I was more just I was scared.
And then, what's your degree in? Were you planning on being in something communications, entertainment adjacent, or was this a total switch for you?
Yeah, so initially, because like I said, I did not consider a career in entertainment to be realistic. I went to college thinking I would do like drawing and painting, like studio art kind of. But then when I started doing stand up in my freshman year, so I caught the bug, as it were, pretty early. And about halfway through, like my sophomore year, I realized comedy was really what I wanted to do. And part of the reason I did that thing at Second City was like that's the closest thing I could get to majoring in comedy. Otherwise, there's not, especially back then, there were not places or any way to do that. And then I shifted my major in college to be film and TV just because I felt like that was a little more appropriate for my new career aspirations.
Yeah,
Felt like those skills and learning that stuff would be more applicable.
that absolutely makes sense. So, did you use some of those skills when you were doing the 31 for 31 and the Quazala show?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, if we're just talking about like drawing lines from that decision, this is le- uh, uh, this is less answering your question. But when I was 19, I was a sophomore. I took one of my first film classes was like intro to digital video production or something, and there was a guy in that class who didn't go to Notre Dame. He actually worked in the building, but he was a young guy. He was only like 3 or 4 years older than me, and he was auditing the class. He was just able to take the class because he worked in the building, and he was really, really good. And he was like better than everybody. I remember at first being jealous, being like, "This guy, how dare he? He can't. He's like a full adult." But I start after that, I started doing stuff at the campus TV station with my own like sketch show. And I immediately was like, well, I that guy was really good. And I had found that he was like funny and fun to hang out with. So I was like, why don't you like direct some videos? And flash forward to now, he directed all the videos for the 31 videos. He directed everything for Quazala, the Amazon show. He and I work very closely together to this day. Every video pretty much I've done, he has directed. So all the way back to that connection in college from when I was a sophomore, I still work with that guy, and he's still like the best collaborator creatively that I have.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and there were things in my college, like kind of video and film courses, like basic editing skills. Now I usually now I'm not that skilled of an editor, but on a very basic level, like we put out a trailer maybe a week before we released the 31 videos, and I put that together. I have the rudimentary skills where I can use the blade tool, and that's about that's about all you need. And I put together the trailer myself, because I mean, with our release of that, and if anybody's listening, I don't think I explained that, but I released 31 original comedy videos in one day. It's huge undertaking, huge creative project.
Certainly, yeah.
And
Editing time on that, I have to imagine.
oh yeah, I mean, and we were editing all those videos pretty much right up to when we released. So like a week before, Daniel, the director and editor, was so immersed in trying to get it done, he didn't have time to make a trailer, which is why I put that on myself and why I had to, roll up the sleeves, open Adobe Premiere, and do it all myself.
Yeah. What did the timeline on that 31 for 31 look like?
It was nearly a full year. I think I came up with the idea at the beginning of 2018, and I started writing some stuff. I think what happened was I wrote a thing and I sent it to Daniel Clark, the very talented director of the project, before there was an idea, and I found myself writing a few different scripts, and then I pitched the idea, and then we assembled a very small team of people that might be interested in helping. And we met in February. I remember that. We got together, and then we were kind of talking, and I was still writing, still in the writing phase, and just sending scripts over to Daniel. And then we started finally, we had some pre production meetings, but then we finally started shooting in April. And the idea was okay, from now on, we were all busy people. I was traveling a lot doing stand up, and then everybody else had a full time job. And Daniel was working on a documentary feature that he was directing. But we were like, on the weekends and whenever we can find time, let's try to shoot a few of these. And so that was the mentality from mid-April, I think, to about August, July or August, the summer. So it took a while, and that was just getting primary photography, as they call it. And then from there, right until we debuted in November, we were editing. So and it was a learning process of time management and how to pull this off. But we were afforded our own schedule because we could release whenever we wanted. But it took, all told, we released in like November 14th or something. It was almost a full year.
Yeah, that's pretty a pretty beefy project. How did those 31 videos then transition into the Amazon Prime show?
Yeah. So what we had thought was, we liked the videos, and it felt like we could still do something with it. Like, we put them all out there. We were very happy with the response. But we were like, okay, but how do we like package this to look more traditional? Because releasing 31 videos in one day, that was a fun project because we had not seen anyone do that type of thing before. But like, what if we want to try one of the more traditional channels? So we thought, what if there are all these really cool independent television festivals, which we had done before. We had done a pilot that won Best Comedy at the New York Television Festival in 2014. And Daniel, again, also works and does great work as a documentary filmmaker. So he had some experience with these festivals, and we thought, okay, let's maybe compile these into a pilot and submit that. Maybe there was a pretty cool festival that Daniel had gone to called Series Fest in Denver. So we put it. It was not too hard to put it together. We just like found some music. We're very lucky to have both a very committed and talented composer who's just a friend of ours who's really talented, who had actually, we just looked through his archives to find a song, and we were like, can we use this? And he was like, yeah, sure. And then we have a very talented graphics illustrator animator friend who put something together for like an opening title sequence. And so ended up being about 15 minutes, I think 15, 17 minutes. And then we submitted it to this category at Series Fest, and we got a good response, and we got some you know I got a nice lucite. I don't even know if you can see it from here. I think it's hiding somewhere back there, but this like nice little like, we won a thing, and like, this is great, this is the best of its category or whatever. And then from there we got the opportunity to put it and then take the rest of the videos and put them into episodes and put them onto Amazon.
Nice. Now I've got to ask about the Tainted Love video.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Now, Absolutely hilarious. One of my favorite
Thank you.
videos. How long did it take you to put together and learn that dance alone?
Yeah. So luckily, I mean, people have asked that question before, and I'm usually like, I don't know, it was like hours. But then I realized I could actually look at my phone because I have a lot of failed attempts on my
That
phone.
was gonna be my next question. Was it one take?
Yeah, I mean, what you see was one take, but like I had to start and stop a lot. And, that was an idea that I had wanted to do for a long time. Generally, like, what about a fake dance tutorial? I felt like I hadn't seen that before. But it never really came together because one, the idea, it was just daunting, the work that I had to put into it. Plus, I have roommates. I also don't have a lot of room in my house.
Yeah, as a college
Uh,
student, I get that.
yeah, right. And also, I live in Los Angeles, which is it's a city. So there's just like a lot of noise going on all the time. So I didn't really have the quiet I need. I didn't have the space I needed. I didn't have the privacy I needed. So and it had, when we started the 31, because the dance video was part of the 31, we had a working spreadsheet just to keep ourselves updated on what we had coming up. And we would, we'd have these, they would have, the, it would say like the slap remake on the sheet. And then we would eventually put when we wanted to shoot it, and then we would eventually shoot it and we would move it to a different tab. And then there was always this thing that said dance tutorial that I had written there, but there was no script, and it was up to me to do it. And so it had just stayed there. And I didn't know, again, because of my conditions, because of where I was living, I just didn't know that I was going to be able to do it. And then I found myself at home for a wedding. I was back in my parents' house, and they were not. There was one night where they were just not home. They were out of town. And so I had this suburban house all to myself, extremely quiet, a lot of space, and as much privacy as I could want. And so it occurred to me, and that may be something you notice, that the room I'm in
Yeah, I was
looks
gonna ask
like,
about that. That's very classic Midwestern parent
yeah.
decor.
Yeah, that's a suburban house in Pittsburgh. So yeah, it's definitely at my parents' house. And I was like, all right, well, it's now or never. This is, this is perfect condition, so I'm gonna have to do this. I think by the time I realized I wanted to do it, it was probably already like 8 p.m. or whatever. So I looked for a song that was short. That was a big thing because I didn't want to dance for 5 minutes. So I looked for a song, and Tainted Love was good. And I like that because occasionally it has the bump, bump. So that's almost like a metronome in a weird way, where dance, move, dance, move, dance, move, bump, bump, dance, move, dance, move, dance, move. And I can keep a rhythm like that. And it has something to go back to, so I can keep time
It's almost like a
almost.
pop line dance.
Yeah, exactly. So that was like, okay, it started to come together. And let me see. Okay, so I'm pulling this up. This was, well, not, no, that couldn't be right. Okay, the first attempt was at 12:13 in the morning. Yeah, so maybe I even started this later. Like I'm at 9 or 10. I was starting to put it together and writing down moves and thinking of different things I could do with my body that were different from the thing before it, and try to keep it different and new. So I started, let's see how long this is. 12:13 a.m. on July 30th, 2018. I 1 minute 10, and then I did a 21 second, and then a 57 second, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18, 24. So I tried it 24 times, and the one that worked was at 2:23 a.m. So it looks like it took me over 2 hours just of the part of trying to nail it.
That's not too
And
bad, actually.
hey, thanks.
I figured it'd be much, much longer. It would take me much, much longer.
Yeah, I mean, it was getting late though, and I'm so happy that people responded to the video, because I'll be honest, when I finished it, I really didn't think that I nailed it. I kind of, the standard that I was hoping for was a little bit better, and I didn't think I did it as well as I could have. It felt good enough. And I remember sending it to the director, who did not. really. He was like, "Yeah, I think this is pretty good," and I was like, "Yeah, I think so too." So we weren't really anticipating much of a response until I sent it to one of my other friends too, just because I Daniel's response was not super
Yeah,
encouraging, to
it's
be
not what you
perfectly
wanted.
honest. So, and I had worked so hard, and I just didn't want to do it again because it was impossible to nail.
Well, I
So I
have
sent
to
it to him.
assume by almost 3 in the morning, the delirium was starting to set in.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going crazy, and I'm like, I just want this to be done. So I sent it to my friend, a friend from college who is one of my closest friends, and I was like, "Do you think this is like? What do you think about this?" And his response was like, "Oh my god, like this is like one of the most impressive things I've ever seen." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that was like a very different." Okay, then I felt a little more encouraged.
Yeah, I think personally one of the things that makes it fantastic is it very much has that feeling of kid getting a camcorder for the first time and what do I film, and then just the narration of the dance moves makes it have that dance tutorial double rainbow
Hmm.
quality to it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah, it's funny. I do set it up. There is a version on Twitter that I had to cut down to 2 minutes 20 seconds, but there's on YouTube about 20 additional seconds of me setting it up, kind of like a YouTuber, like a "Hey guys" kind of thing. And I say in the video that this is the actual dance for the real dance that they do in the music video. And it's so funny on the internet. You can say the thing that to me that's like the most absurd thing in the world. That like that is the real dance that they did in the 80s. But so many people respond in the comments and are like, I can't I watched the music video from the 80s and I don't understand. I don't think these are what's the right music video, because he says this is, and like sarcasm does not translate over the internet in a way that is for this one kind of funny.
Yeah, and I think you caught a perfect generational difference of a whole group of kids that are on Twitter haven't seen that video, aren't familiar with that video.
Yeah, or maybe don't even know that song.
Yeah. So, how does your writing for stand up differ from your writing for some of that more sketch comedy work?
Yeah, it's very different. And it's funny. I'm so not in the mindset of stand up right now, but what's nice about doing the sketches is you can kind of do what you want and not have to really be at the mercy of the audience. Like I obviously try to think about like what people will like and what people will find funny. But with stand up, when I go up there, I'll usually go up there having jotted down some ideas and maybe some specific word orderings of what I want to say. But if they don't laugh, then I have to change it or I have to abandon it, you know? Whereas I can, for better or for worse, I can follow through on an idea with sketch where it's entirely up to me if I want to do it. Now, that can be freeing and that can also be dangerous because with sketch, and live sketch is a completely different thing, but like with these videos, I can say like, okay, I want to do this idea, and I can go full steam ahead, and I don't have to get any sort of approval, so I can be more experimental. I can be weirder. I can do things that maybe only appeal to a small niche of people, and that's cool, and I like that. But also, I can go forward with an idea that no one's gonna like, and I have no indication of that. Whereas with stand up, I'm told immediately
Yeah.
what's working and what isn't.
What was some of your original stand up like, and how has it evolved from the time you were at
Ooh,
Notre Dame getting up there in front of your
yeah,
peers?
yeah. Um, I have my first few sets recorded because I was so on a camcorder. Well, now I can't but like when a digital video, like a digital camera used to be able to record video.
Yeah.
I have some of those somewhere. I have not looked at those in a long time, and I do not want to look at those. But I was very rehearsed, which was you know good because I wasn't like fumbling over my words, but also I did not sound very natural. And the stuff I talked about, I definitely tried to be edgy in a way that was like, and not too extreme, but the kind of you're 18 or 19 and you're just trying to shock people.
Yeah.
and in saying things about whatever, maybe punching down a little bit in a way that I didn't know what that was, or I didn't know what I was doing. That wasn't the bulk of my stand up. I still tried to be like silly. Um, but like even in like the first few years, one thing that I think helped me that I was able to eventually break out of was planting my feet. I think there's something with public speaking and with stand up when you are on stage or you're presenting something. And this is even for like you're giving you're doing an oral exam, or you're doing, you're giving a presentation to the class. You'll notice that people kind of sway and like they kind of shuffle their feet a little bit. They don't know they're doing it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a nervous thing. And I recognized that, I think maybe even in other stand-ups that were students at school. So I made sure when I got out there, boom, my feet were planted, confident stance, right? So that I was, present and mostly just not looking nervous or unsure of myself.
Yeah, kind of a fake it till you make it with your body language there.
Yeah. And then once I, had been doing stand up for a while, this, I don't know how long this took, but then I started to be like, okay, I do this. I know how to do this. I can move around a little bit now. I can move around with purpose. I can move my body in like a fun way. I can put my foot on the stool. I can lunge around. I can just, because I think my comedy now is rather physical, and I'm glad that I had that. And I think that was a huge turning point in my stand up, was the way I used my body, because it is authentic kind of to the way I am. Because I mean, like we just spent a long time talking about a dance video,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm a pretty physical guy. And so the fact that I was a stand up who like didn't move at all, and while he told his jokes, I just was not, I may have been good and improved and figured things out, but I wasn't able to really be my full self and realize my full comedic potential until I started to really use the stage and move around and use my body.
When do you feel like you started hitting your kind of comedic stride there?
I would say,
Hang on, sorry.
oh, okay. I bet, am I back now?
Yeah, sorry. We're in the basement of a boys' dorm, so the internet's a little iffy.
Okay, for sure. I mean, I get that. I remember when I first went to college, my freshman year. It was the first year that the college had Wi-Fi,
Oh, that's
and so
exciting.
and it was like, it was so funny, the student newspaper, which we made fun of all the time because it was it's the student newspaper. One of their big headlines that we made fun of for years was campus Wi-Fi sluggish, and that was
That was
the
it.
full headline. um Oh, I feel like I really started to turn a corner. Like there were a number of moments where I felt like I leveled up, so to speak. But I think it was at the end of 2016, and I had been doing stand up at that point for seriously for about 8 or so years. And I say seriously because there had been, I don't really count those first few years in college, because I would do stand up maybe, like the first time I did stand up was October, and then the next time I did it was in February, and then March, and then I didn't do it again until September. So that first year I just did it 3 times. So I don't really count that as being serious, but I was like, dipping my toe. But it wasn't until I got to Chicago when I was like doing it a lot. So yeah, I was like maybe 7 or 8 years in, where I started, certain jokes were really hitting in a way that felt new. And I was utilizing my body and my voice too. A lot of my stand up comes from the way that I alter and use my voice. And I just felt it was different. It's almost like you think like, oh, you were killing before, but no, you weren't. Now this is what that is. Like you were just fine. But I started to feel like, oh, I'm getting a new type of laughter. I feel like I'm connecting with the audience a little bit better. And I think that came from, and that maybe coincided with just doing it a lot. And I started to travel too. I made it a point to get out of Los Angeles and go to other cities like Denver or Atlanta, or go back to Chicago, or go to New York. And I think that, and I was starting to do festivals too. And I think that really got me into good fighting shape. And that's when the Comedy Central stuff started to happen too.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you said some of your early influences were Conan O'Brien and guys
Hmm.
like that. As you started kind of finding your place in comedy, who were you looking to and not necessarily emulating, but seeing a style that you liked?
Yeah, I think when I started to hit my stride, I was not. What happens when you're like deep into comedy is, at least for me, I was such a comedy nerd, and now I don't like watch any comedy other than what I see in person. So like when I was starting to do stand up, I was very into the what I guess you would call the alt comedy scene, which was people like Zach Galifianakis and Maria Bamford and Patton Oswalt and Louis C.K. and Sarah Silverman. And those were my guys, so to speak, for stand up when I was just starting. And then, like I said, after a while, I'm trying to think, like, maybe the last, I mean, Mulaney it's hard to deny just how great he is. And I've been a fan of his since he's not much older than me, but when he
Yeah.
was like a young man.
Yeah. Oh, I'd
Uh,
argue he's surpassed just comedy fans into kind of a greater um, pop culture realm.
yeah, absolutely. And that's great because a lot of people ask me, like, who do you like? And then I'll say like Rory Scovel, and then they won't know who I'm talking about. But Mulaney, everybody knows at this point, which is cool because he's really excellent.
Okay, awesome. And so, kind of pivoting a little bit and talking about your podcast about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So, I'm a native Ohioan, so familiar with it.
Okay.
But
Sure, you have to be.
yeah, what kind of sparked that full on love with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I think it's a few things coming together. Like one thing is I'm from Pittsburgh, which is very close to, it's like 2 hours from
Yeah.
Cleveland, and my dad is from Cleveland. So when we would go visit my grandma or we'd go visit my aunts and uncles, we would stop by the Rock Hall. But I had an interest in going because I I think maybe as like a little contrarian boy growing up, I uh, dismissed the new music of my peers, and then was into like classic rock, which
Okay,
is
so I was gonna say, no offense, you were very much one of those kids that's a classic rock elitist.
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay,
absolutely. And I regret that to some extent because I missed out on some cool music that I could have been listening to and been a young person who was listening to the Strokes. But no, I was like, old music that's really the classics. That's what it's all about. And I got very deep into that. And there was a pretty good classic rock station in Pittsburgh that was not very repetitive, and they played a lot of deep cuts. And I got into calling in a lot
okay,
and winning radio contests. I got pretty good at that. I developed it as like a skill. And one of the ways to get good at winning radio contests is to know a lot of stuff about the music you're listening to, because it's trivia, or they used to play four songs in a row that had a theme, but they didn't say what the theme was, and you try to guess the theme.
yeah,
And so it was a Ouroboros. It was like a snake eating itself, where it was like, I really like classic rock, and because I really like classic rock, I know so much stuff that I can then win these contests, and I want to win more contests, so I try to know more stuff. And then it just kind of feeds into itself. And also, I grew up in an era of the list. Like VH1 used to constantly do these 100 greatest lists, and Rolling Stone would constantly put out their own lists, like the first 500 greatest albums list, which is something they updated very, very recently. But the first one they put out was in 2003, which was when I was in high school. And so and a list really scratches some sort of itch in me, that is really satisfying.
I get that 100%. Those are the majority of what plays in my house on the weekends still. Those
Yeah.
list shows VH1 has them where you have different comedians talking about the top 10 yacht rock songs and
Yes.
yeah.
There's something really, really satisfying about it. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has that same satisfaction for me because it is like an evolving list.
Okay.
Like you have these lists of, it's canonization of the greatest artists of all time. But unlike, say, a Rolling Stone list or a VH1 list, this list you can add to it. And you add 5 or 6 names every year, which is really cool. So you can like look forward to something every year, and there's almost like a built-in sports like thing to it where you know the stats, you know who's been nominated a lot but never gotten in, or you know who's going to become eligible next year, or you know who's never been nominated, there was a Go-Go's documentary this year. Does that mean the Go-Go's are finally going to be on the ballot? This is maybe the timing is right for them. So there's a lot of things that are very fun to speculate about and talk about. And I think the Rock Hall is also something that people don't understand because you hear about it. Everyone knows it exists, but nobody like watches the induction ceremonies, and nobody really knows who's in and who isn't in. And that element of it, I think, really breeds conversation. Like, what? Pat Benatar isn't in? What are you talking about? And then you just go from there,
Yeah,
which is why a podcast seemed like I was going on other people's podcasts and talking about the Rock Hall, where it felt like, and we weren't even scratching the surface.
yeah.
So it felt like there's something here.
When you dig into it, there's almost a certain level of controversy and drama to every nominee and to every induction class.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can go deep on artists you didn't think you cared about because there's so much to it of like when they become eligible, when they get nominated, and then if they get inducted, and then when that happens, then there's a whole litany of things of like which members of the group get inducted, will they show up to the induction ceremony, what will they play, who will induct them, etc. There's like so many different things, and I think those induction ceremonies, I've been to two. To me, that's like the ideal concert lineup. Like how you do a concert is like you play a 3-minute documentary about the band that gets you really hype, and then you bring out a famous person to talk about why that band is great, and then the band comes up and says thank you. Then they play their 3 or 4 best songs, and then you start over with the next band.
Yeah. Well, that's even an extra level of drama to it because with a lot of these bands, are they still together? Do they even want to be in the same room together? How much do they hate their most popular songs?
Yeah, that happens all the time. Nearly every year, there's some sort of crazy thing happening, or there's a big question mark of will this person show up, or will anybody show up?
Are we going to get a Gallagher Brothers cage match this year?
Yeah, I mean that I'm very fascinated about bands like Oasis or the Smiths, like bands that have not been in the same room for a long time and hate each other.
Yeah.
The mind it can go so many different places with that.
Yeah, those are always the best stories. So, do you have anyone who's the biggest snub you feel like that they should absolutely be in the Rock Hall? I know you mentioned Pat Benatar, but who is it that it's absolute bullshit that they're not in?
I think, it used to be The Cure for a long time, and they got in 2 years ago, and that was my answer. And I'm starting to think the biggest snub now is Kool and the Gang.
Okay.
Because they had such a long career, and they had different phases in their career, which I think is a very impressive thing to do. Because they started in the late 60s as this like cool funk band doing songs like Jungle Boogie and Summer Madness and Hollywood Swinging, these songs that are super recognizable and have these iconic riffs, like horn riffs, and they were like a party band too. And then they have this second phase because they didn't have a lead singer for a long time. Like if you think about Jungle Boogie, it's just a bunch of guys saying Jungle Boogie over the groove. And they added a lead singer, and then they had these songs like Get Down on It or Celebration, and then they started to have like big like top 10 hits, right? And they have all these songs that are not just recognizable, but I think have become like huge. Like Celebration, if you want to say it's cheesy, but like that is a song that gets played at every
Yeah.
wedding.
That's something
Like
that
that,
everyone can sing even if they don't know the band.
it has withstood the test of time for sure for a song from the 80s. And I just think you think of longevity, you think of all the songs people know, and you know, they have Grammys, they have multi-platinum albums. And then there's this additional little thing that I think puts them over the top, which is their influence on hip hop. If you really look into it, is profound because they are sampled so much, especially if you're talking about like 90s, 2000s hip hop. There's so many, like Let Me Clear My Throat by DJ Cool and Feel So Good by Puff, are they both heavily sample Hollywood swinging and this the same horn riff, the ba 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 ba. Like they're a pivotal part of so many hip hop songs. And if you go to the website whosampled.com, you can see who is the most sampled of all the artists. And obviously like James Brown is like at the top, Michael Jackson's at the top, and there's a lot of cross breeding sampling of other hip hop artists. But right up there at the top is Cool and the Gang, like with thousands of samples. I just think they're so important. And we had Ronald Bell passed away a few weeks ago, who was a founding member, and I just think that's a shame that he didn't get to see his induction, and I hope it happens soon because I think that era and that genre is also, we haven't seen like a funk R&B soul band inducted in a long time. So I don't think we've served that genre very well, and I think they would be a perfect inductee. And it's been a long time coming. Never been on the ballot.
Awesome. That was a pretty good case for Cool in the Gang.
Thank you so much.
Now,
Thank you.
on the flip side of that coin, do you feel like there's anyone in the Rock Hall? And I know that the nom-com's a pretty rigorous kind of voting process, but is there anyone in that you feel like hasn't earned it?
Yeah, I do think there are some questionable choices. Now, I love Fleetwood Mac. They're one of my favorite bands. They're one of the most deserving, and I think their impact and influence has only grown since their induction. They got inducted in the late 90s. I think Fleetwood Mac is still like a band that people discover and are like
They're having a
complete.
resurgence right now, especially with college age kids.
Yeah. And so Fleetwood Mac rules. That being said, and so I want to get that out of the way. I don't really think Stevie Nicks' solo career is that worthy of induction. You talk to the average person, I don't think they can probably name for Steely, or excuse me, Steely Dan is a completely, I'm A-okay with them. But for Stevie Nicks, solo songs, I just don't think her solo career is anything to write home about. And I think she got through because I think it's a very weird sequence of events because she was number one at when they started doing this thing at the museum where if you're at the museum, you can type in who you think should be inducted that isn't already. And somehow Stevie Nicks got in there and got towards the top. And I think everyone was like, Stevie Nicks isn't in, not realizing she's in with Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
So she won that poll. And then I think that got her to the nominating committee, who then were like, yeah, let's put her on the ballot. And then I think people voted for her because they were like, yeah, Stevie deserves to be in because she is such an icon.
Yeah.
And like she is singular and so important. But I think the important work that she did was with Fleetwood Mac. I don't really believe that her solo career is worthy. And there's a few people like that who have this iconic status, like Jeff Beck, who's this one of the great guitar players of all time. He's in with the Yardbirds, but then he got nominated for some reason as a solo artist, and like nobody knows a Jeff Beck solo song, but he still got in anyway, kind of off of name recognition.
Yeah, it's not being weighted off of just their solo career. It's kind of being weighted off their career as a whole.
Yeah, and he wasn't inducted for real, and I can kind of explain that. He was inducted in a special category, but they put Ringo in all right. It was just like all the Beatles are in solo, and like I think they, they deserve, but every time they're inducted solo, they play Beatles songs at the induction. So then you're like, is this really about their solo career, or
Yeah.
is it just that we love the Beatles so much?
That's an interesting perspective, I guess, that I'd never really thought about with the Hall of Fame and the inductions. Uh,
Yeah, double inductions to me are kind of sometimes they're warranted. I feel like if you have someone like Peter Gabriel, whose work as a solo artist was very, very different from what he was doing with Genesis, I get that. But otherwise, there's a lot of examples that I think are suspect.
okay. So you mentioned as a kid growing up on Pittsburgh classic rock radio.
Yes.
Were you the kind of kid that was also going out and buying records and CDs and reading through the liner notes, or was your kind of consumption of music at that point limited to the radio?
Well, around the same time, the radio was huge for me, but around the same time that I was getting into this music was like the rise of downloading stuff,
Okay.
like
LimeWire
Napster.
and all that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, like Napster was so great and it flamed out so hard, so fast. But yeah, then it became Kazaa and LimeWire and all these other knockoffs that none of them were as good as Napster. And also, they were like full of adware and like spyware, and they were just these they were so dangerous for your computer, but I needed it. But yeah, and then I compiled a pretty rich collection of mp3s, really. And then I did get albums, just feeling like I should have some CDs. But that, I feel like that didn't last too long, because I was like, good, I have, because I would get something like my Aim is True by Elvis Costello, mainly because he was not really played on the classic rock station, but I knew about him and I wanted to, and getting into the deep cuts, getting the albums kind of helped me with that. And I tried to go for maybe the artists that weren't played all the time. Like you get Led Zeppelin 4, those are all songs that are played on the radio pretty much. So it feels like a waste, but
So were you surrounded by a group of friends that was listening to the same stuff or similar stuff, or were your friends listening to more mainstream at the time stuff, and you were the guy
um,
kind of nerding out about classic rock?
I had one friend, and I named Greg, who I think really brought me into that world. He was kind of into it before me, and then his snobbery got me thinking, and then I kind of followed suit. So like we were both definitely in, and I had friends who were into it to varying degrees, but I wouldn't say that anyone outside of my one friend was really as into it as me. But he's usually the guy I would go to concerts, some of them very bad, and he usually would be the one that would come along.
What are some of your favorite shows that you've been to, live music wise?
Yeah, I love going to those induction ceremonies. The
What
2019 one
I was
was
gonna ask,
really,
what
really
years did
good.
you go to?
2019 and 2017, both really good years. 2019 was The Cure and the Zombies and Roxy Music and Def Leppard and Janet and Radiohead were inducted that year, but they did not perform. And then Stevie Nicks opened that year, and she was good, but again, I have my opinions. That was a really great year. And then I went 2017, which was kind of half classic rock, half other, like Journey and Yes and Electric Light Orchestra, along with Joan Baez, Tupac, and there was a Tupac tribute, and Pearl Jam
Okay,
were the headliners.
nice.
And
So
those were both really good.
yeah, yeah. As I've gotten older, have gotten into Pearl Jam, as I think many people do. They come to appreciate Pearl Jam.
Yeah, they are sometimes made fun of, or when you first hear Eddie Vedder's voice, you maybe don't get it or you laugh at it. But yeah, that's a group that I've seen them live a few times. Like obviously I saw their induction, and that was great, and they were really good. I saw them live in 2006 in Pittsburgh, and then I saw them perform at the first Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien. I got tickets to that. I wanted to see the very first Tonight Show because I was like, this is historic. He'll be doing this for decades, and that lasted a year. Um, but I saw them perform in a talk show setting, which was really cool.
Okay, so kind of a funky segue, but Temple of the Dog
Yeah.
is a super group that I push on my friends and family and everyone around me constantly because I don't think
Oh
they
yeah.
get near enough love.
Uh
Who
huh.
is that one super group to you that is the greatest, can never be topped?
Oh man, do you mean like just the best band, or specifically like a super group in the sense of like pulling from different bands to make one new band,
Like a super group. We'll
like a
go with
super
we'll
group?
go with just favorite group in a minute, but is there
Okay,
one
yeah, yeah, yeah.
super group that really sticks out to
Ooh,
you?
that's a really good question because I would say objectively the greatest super group of all time is Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Okay. All right.
Like just to the point where they aren't even seen necessarily as a super group because that group is bigger than
Than what
any
they were
of
on
they're
their own. Yeah.
they're bigger than Buffalo Springfield. They're bigger than the Hollies. They're bigger than the Birds. I think. Uh, so that one is because it almost feels like that's the way they're supposed. And I like all those other groups, but that's the way they're meant to be heard. Like those guys together, that's the real group. It's almost like they're they're not the super group of the other groups. They're just like a group, and then those are the pre-groups
Yeah.
that brought them to that. Uh, yeah. Now this is not a question I've really thought about because I'm trying to put in my head. You know, you could maybe call. I was gonna say, could you call Crowded House a super group because Neil Finn came out of the band Split Ends, but I don't know that anybody else was really from anything special. And
What about along
now
the
I'm.
same lines? Is there anyone that has a side project that you love way more than whatever their main thing is?
Mm, mm. You know, I think Danny Elfman is an interesting one to think about because I think to two different types of people, Danny Elfman means a different thing. Like obviously he was the really obviously he's a composer. That's like his big thing is that he composes music, and I think he's one of the great composers. And some of his film score work you still hear today. Like you still hear stuff from Pee Wee's Big Adventure used in trailers for other movies, and stuff from Beetlejuice or whatever. But then he was a rock star. He was in a band called Oingo Boingo for the longest time. And depending on who you talk to, Danny Elfman is a completely different,
Yeah.
and like I really like the Nightmare Before Christmas score, and he's the singing voice of Jack Skellington in that. And the idea of like, yeah, I Oingo Boingo's good, but I prefer his Halloween Christmas
Yeah.
songs
His Disney
for Tim
works
Burton.
more. My
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy.
That is really
And
interesting. I did not know that. Nightmare Before Christmas. Fun fact there.
yeah, and he wrote all that music, and he sings for the character, and they cast Chris Sarandon as the speaking voice for that character because his speaking voice sounds like Danny Elfman's singing voice.
Huh. That's
They like
interesting.
reverse cast it just because they were like, obviously Danny's going to be singing this. Now we need to find
Now we need to find
somebody.
no one to speak.
Yeah, find an actor who can act and sound like he could feasibly be singing these songs.
All right. Okay, I'll let you go here in a minute, but before we do that, I always ask everyone to pick 3 songs, and you sent
Yes.
me yours. And
Uh
I
huh.
was super excited about all of these picks, but especially Nirvana, because that's kind of in the vein of what I usually play on the show.
Oh, great.
But I won't step on your toes too much if you want to talk about the songs and why you picked them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you're going to ask me to pick a song, I'm going to pick what I think is the best song. And like, what is my favorite song from my favorite group? My favorite group's Nirvana. And I just think In Bloom is a song that I just do not get tired of. It like gets me amped. It gets like there's just something about those opening riffs, and then the drum beat is so interesting. Uh it gets me every time, and it's a song I've been listening to forever. And that's why Nirvana is my favorite group. It's not really an intellectual thing. It's just the fact that I can listen to their music all the time and I do not get tired of it. I have phases where and everybody has this. They have phases where they get really into a band and you get into them, and then eventually you get tired of them and you want to move on. That has just not happened for me with Nirvana. So like they have to be my favorite. Like my body chooses it. Like it's
That's more than fair.
involuntary. Yeah. So, yeah, In Bloom is just incredible, and that's my favorite song from my favorite group. And then I wanted to pick
Hang
a
on, can I interject real quick?
yeah,
So
please,
before we
please.
get into the next two, I've got to go into this a little bit, and all my friends are going to dog on me for this. What do you think about Kurt Cobain's death? I mean, obviously, a horrible tragedy,
Yeah,
losing him
terrible.
so young, but in the last few years, we've had all these documentaries with different theories about his death.
Uh-huh.
Um, and do you have your own? Do you have a theory that you think is the right one?
Yeah, I think his death is so tragic and so unfair and just such a loss that I think naturally people cannot fathom it. I know I can't. And I think when people, and I don't even think this happens consciously, when people do not want to believe that he killed himself, because that is the type of almost chaos that is hard on a like human level to really take, which is why I think there are so many conspiracy theories, because it is not an easy pill to swallow that he would kill himself. And that's why I think people believe that something else happened, because there's no way he would do that. But I do think he killed himself.
Okay.
I think the messages in some of his songs are kind of clear, sadly. And also, he left a suicide note.
Yeah.
As much as I would, as I weirdly want to believe that he wouldn't do that, and that there's something else to the story, I, I think he killed himself.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's man, I want more music from him so bad, more than anything. But
Yeah.
yeah,
He's one of those
it
artists
would
that really no one could consume enough of his work.
no, yeah, it's just so sad. I mean, we're lucky to have what we have.
Okay. Sorry about that sad downturn. I'm just interested
No, no,
because
no.
everyone kind of has their own take on it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I've thought about it, but at one point it just kind of clicked for me where I was like, he left a note. He kind of told us through his music in a sense, and also there is that pull to try and believe that there's other players, there's other people controlling this. Um, and I think it's why people do theories, is control something.
Me? Are we?
Yeah, I
Okay,
can.
cool. All right, I'll let you talk about your last two songs a little bit, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah. So I Sister Rosetta Tharpe was inducted in the Rock Hall a few years ago, and she is like a godmother of rock and roll, and an undersung one. She, was idolized by Elvis, and she was idolized by Johnny Cash, and so many people who were. But she's an artist from the '40s and before, and there are so many cool videos of this you know big queer black woman with an electric guitar on black and white TV who's just shredding, and it's just like inspiring and so cool. And I think she just needs to be sought out more, and she needs to be talked about more, and she needs to be played more. So if I'm asked to put out a song, I'm gonna pick Sister Rosetta, just because I want to try to expose her music as much as I can. She's just so cool. And Strange Things Happening Every Day is one of her best songs, and it's also like a really important song because it was a gospel song that charted both on the gospel charts and what were at the time called the race records charts, which evolved into the R&B charts. But obviously, music used to be very segregated. But it was like a major crossover song, and it's a really important song kind of in the history of music. And then Joey Scarberry, theme from Greatest American Hero, believe it or not, is just a song that I think people know, but they don't know where they know it from. It's a song that it is absorbed into the pop culture fabric somehow, and everyone can sing it and has heard "Believe It or Not, I'm Walking on Air." And I found myself just singing it around the house, and my girlfriend was like, "I sing that song too. Was I just singing that?" And I was like, "No, I just sing it." And so she was like, "I don't know where it is." And I was like, "Oh, it's this like theme song from this TV show that nobody remembers." called Greatest American Hero. It's about a guy who finds like a super suit, but he loses the instructions. Nobody knows that song. So what we did was we were like, we got to figure out why everybody knows this song. So we looked it up and we found every TV show that uses the song in the episode somewhere. And then we sought out all those episodes and we watched those individually for like a few days.
That's
So we watched
hilarious.
like
What are some of the bigger shows that it's been featured on?
so one of the big ones is Seinfeld.
Okay.
George uses it as his like outgoing answering machine message, and he says like, believe it or not, George isn't at home. That's the big one. But then it's in Gilmore Girls, it's on ER, it's on the show Supernatural, it's on My Name Is Earl, it's on The Tick, it's in so many different shows and Heroes. And it was very fun to put these shows on and we would be watching them. We'd forget why we'd be watching them, and then it would come on and we'd grab each other and be like, here it is. And that was like that was a fun quarantine
Yeah.
project for like a week.
Nice, nice. All right, so we'll wrap it up here, but where can people see you, find you, reach out to you, watch your stuff?
Yeah, anything that's going on with me, I will tweet about at Joe K. You can follow me on Instagram at Joe Kwa, and you can listen to the podcast. Who cares about the Rock Hall? You can find that wherever you find podcasts. And if you want to check out my website, I don't know, joekwazala.com, you can go there too. But really, Twitter is where anything worth happening is going to be posted about.
All right, awesome. Looking forward to seeing what's next for you comedy wise and hopefully post quarantine wise.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thanks for coming on.
Of course. Take care.
Bye.